Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I'm excited to see you all and to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces too. My name is Pickett Irving. I am the Enterprise Zone Program Director for the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. The Virginia Enterprise Zone Program includes 45 enterprise zones throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Those zones go as far east as Accomack and Northampton counties and as far west as Zone 52, which is Wise County. As you can see from this map, a lot of the enterprise zone localities are in the southern part of the state. Enterprise zones were originally designated based on distress scores, and those distress scores are created by taking various data and aggregating it, including unemployment rate, median household income, and free or reduced lunch rates. And so you can see that a lot of those localities are in the South. Although there are 45 zones, 61 localities participate in the program because there are zones that have joint zones where two localities share a zone. There are also some zones that have multiple, some localities that have multiple zones. For instance, the city of Richmond has its own independent zone, and they also have a joint zone within Henrico County. This is a little look at the numbers from this past year. So as I'm going to go over in the next slide, we run off of calendar year. So this is everything that happened in calendar year 2021. There were 50 businesses that received job creation grants, and they created 4,115 jobs or retained those jobs. And they received about 2.49 million in total awards. For our real property investment grants, there were 114 properties who leveraged over 307 million in qualified investments. And we're going to go over what those investments are to receive about $11 million in total awards. So the Enterprise Zone program consists of two different types of grants. That's the job creation grant and the real property investment grant. This is what our annual timeline looks like. We've run off of a calendar year. So let's start with where we are right now. We're going to go down to the bottom and look at October. Right now, the zones are submitting their renewal requests if their zone is up for a renewal. They are also submitting their boundary and incentive amendments. So they might be changing the boundaries of their zone to take out areas in the zone that maybe are not as having as many businesses doing rehab and expansion or new construction, and adding areas of the zone that maybe are getting built up and having those areas where they're seeing more economic development activity and they're wanting to make those businesses eligible for these grants. They also might be changing their local incentives. So what I'm going over today is the state incentives. Each zone has its own package of local incentives as well. And to find those out, you can talk to the local zone administrator, which is usually your director of economic development or someone else in the economic development department. So December will come around. So we're coming up on what we call grant year 2022. Grant year 2022 includes all jobs that were created somewhere in calendar year 2022 from January 1st to December 31st. And for those real property investment grants, it includes properties that were placed in service in 2022. So that means they received their final placed in service document. That can include their certificate of occupancy, their final inspection, or their third-party inspection anywhere in calendar year 2022. So the beginning of next year, we're going to be helping businesses go through that application process, helping them, the CPAs also go through the process and answering their questions and helping them prepare those applications. And then applications are due on April 1st each year, which is, yes, April Fool's Day, which I think is so ironic and silly that that's when our applications are due, but they are. And between April and June, we are reviewing those applications. And one thing that I found really interesting when I started this job 2 years ago is that when you submit those applications as a business owner, owner, it's not like you submit them and they're done and you have no communication with the people who are reviewing the grants. If there's a mistake in your application, if you've forgotten something, if you're missing a document, we have to let you know by a certain time period, which is May 15th. And then you have 2 weeks to get all of that information to us. And then we re-review it with all of the information that you've added or changed and fixed. So I think that's a neat part of our program, so that you have another chance to get what you need in order to be able to be eligible for that grant. So on June 30th, the funds are dispersed. And then the rest of the year is us working with the local departments, and they send in their local annual reports to me. And then I take those annual reports and aggregate the data and the information to write an annual report for the Virginia General Assembly money committees, so House Appropriations and Senate Finance committees. So let's go ahead and jump into eligibility and what that looks like. First, we're going to talk about the Real Property Investment Grant. So a qualified zone investor, that's what we call our grantees for this grant. That's any individual or entity that's capitalizing on the cost of the investment that they're making in the building. And there's all different types. They can be property owners, that can be occupant or non-occupant property owners. There can be multiple owners. In that case, they would have special documents, supplemental documents to fill out. They may be tenants. In that case, they also have supplemental documents that they have to fill out in order to get permission from the landlord, and then also developers. So eligible construction types include rehab, expansion, or new construction projects anywhere within an enterprise zone in the Commonwealth. And we do grants for buildings or facilities. Sometimes it gets complicated figuring out what something is counted as. Think of it this way: a building is what you would think of a standalone building, and a facility is something more like multiple buildings that are on one parcel or one property that are owned and managed by the same company. So you might have a lumber company that has one area where they're processing the lumber. They might have another building where they're actually doing retail, and then another building where they're doing admin. That's considered a facility. And so that facility would be eligible for the same thing as a single building, but they might have multiple buildings. And so all of those buildings and facilities, in order to be eligible, must be commercial, industrial, or mixed use. For our purposes, the Virginia Code defines mixed use as at least 30% commercial or industrial. Also, to be eligible, rehab and expansion projects must meet a $100,000 minimum threshold on the qualified investments that they are making. A new construction project must meet a $500,000 threshold for those investments. And our grants are 20% of the qualified real property investment, that's what QRPI stands for, made in excess of the threshold. And grant awards are capped at 5 years, and those are 5 consecutive years. So one company, one grantee, one zone investor, however you choose to call that, may receive up to $100,000 per building or facility for a QRPI of less than 5 million. If you have a QRPI, a qualified investment of more than 5 million, then you're eligible for 200,000. So a lot of information and a lot of numbers. So let's look at it at a chart, which might make it a little bit easier for us all to kind of look at. So on the left side, you have your type. Let's look at a new construction. If the zone investor invests $1 million in the building, then they meet that $500,000 threshold that's necessary for eligibility. That means that you subtract that $500,000 from the 1 million, and they have a total grant eligible funds of $500,000. So for a grant rate of 20%, they would request $100,000. There's a column here for the example proration, and that is because according to Virginia State Code, we are required to fund all of the job creation grants before we fund the real property investment grants. So those job creation grants, whatever the grant is requested, you get that amount 100%. But if we run out of money in our funds for enterprise zone, and that money is all allocated by the General Assembly, then we have to prorate these real property investment grants. In the last 10 years, they've usually been prorated around 70 to 75%. In the last couple of years, there's been less proration. Last year, it was 88 cents for every dollar that was requested. This year, there was no proration necessary for the first time in 12 years. I think that the reason for that is probably because COVID started to catch up with us in terms of creating new jobs and doing new construction projects and things like that. And you may be thinking, well, hey, we're in 2022, that was started in 2020. But remember, everything that happened in the last grant cycle happened in 2021. So I'm hoping that it'll pick back up again for this year's grant cycle. And we actually have been awarded some more funding from the General Assembly. So it's my goal to market this program as much as possible at the state level and to train my local zone administrators to market it at the local level as much as possible as well, so that we don't have leftover funds, because it's a non-reverting fund. It doesn't come back to us. It goes back into the general fund dollars, and they decide what to do with it. So let's look at one more example here for a rehab or expansion project, an investment of $500,000. You have to meet that $100,000 threshold. Total grant eligible funds are $400,000. At 20%, you would have a grant request of $80,000. And this year you would have received the full amount of $80,000. So what is qualified real property investment? Those are hard construction costs. They're structurally part of the building or facility. I like to tell people, if you were to take the building, pick it up, shake it, turn it upside down, if it falls out, it's probably not a qualified investment. If it stays intact with the building, it probably is. So qualified investments include things attached to the building: carpentry, drywall, painting, roofing, HVAC, doors, windows, ceilings. Things that are not qualified include any kind of permit or fee, the acquisition cost of the building, signage, any item that goes beyond the property line. So let's say you're adding sidewalks or any kind of utilities beyond the property line, those do not count. And machinery and tools also do not count. Solar eligibility. So in 2019, there was a legislative change in the Virginia State Code to allow projects with solar components to qualify at lower thresholds. So if you have a project in which you are using solar, and that's the only improvement you're making to your building, and you are spending at least $50,000 in solar, up to $100,000, then you could qualify with a $0 threshold. So you would qualify for the 20%, just like any of the other projects. And if the solar is part of a larger project with other qualified investments, then that would lower the overall threshold by $50,000. So if it was a new construction, the threshold would be from $500,000 to $450,000. And for a rehab or expansion, it would go from $100,000 to $50,000. So let's jump into job creation grants. So all of the job creation grants are for jobs that must be full-time, they must be high waged, and we're going to go over exactly what that means and what that entails in terms of numbers. They must be permanent positions, and they must have health benefits. The owner of the company must provide at least 50% of health benefits to the employee, and they must be net new jobs in Virginia. So for that net new job part, we are talking about not allowing churning. So we can't take jobs from one locality and move them to another locality and count them as new jobs. Those are not considered new jobs for the purposes of this type of grant. So there are some types of jobs that are not eligible. That includes units of government, so local, state, federal, and also nonprofits. All job creation grants are available to new and existing businesses within zones who have created grant eligible positions over their base year employment levels. So for a new business, that base year is going to be year one, the year or the year before your first year. So you would have 0 as your base year. If you're an existing business, then you can choose your base year, and it can be either of the 2 calendar years immediately preceding the year that you're applying for the grant. So let's say you've never applied before, you're applying for this upcoming year for grant year 2022, then you can choose 2021 as your base year number or 2020. So we're going to look at what that looks like in an example. So you must meet a 4-job threshold. Just like we have that threshold for the amount of qualified investment you must make, you must create at least 5 jobs to meet that 4-job threshold for that 5th job to count. Those first 4 jobs don't receive grants. And eligible positions must be net new to Virginia, permanent, full-time, earning at least 175% of minimum wage and offered health benefits. Also, positions that are not eligible are personal service, food and beverage, and retail. And so what does permanent full-time mean according to this grant? That means that there is an indefinite duration. It can't be a job that you know is only going to be around for a certain amount of time. And they must report to work in the zone on a regular basis. So that means at least once per month. That's a rule that we've always had, but it's become even more important now with all of the work from home that we have. For instance, I work for DHCD, but I live in Farmville. I don't necessarily report to work once a month in that Richmond location. So I would not count for this type of grant. And they must be normally scheduled to work either a minimum of 35 hours per week for at least 48 weeks, or a minimum of 35 hours per week for a portion of the taxable year in which the employee was hired. And they must have a minimum of 1,680 hours per year if standard fringe benefits are paid by the business firm. And so I've only included the top level ingredients, I would say, to these grants in this presentation, because there's a lot of information to include and a lot of numbers to include. We have manuals on our website that you can look at to go into more detail about these things. And also you can call me anytime and I can help you work through it. You can call your local economic developer and hopefully they can help you too, but you can always call me and ask me these questions. So let's see, let's jump back in. So let's talk about what those numbers look like. So in the past, our Virginia code stated that we would utilize federal minimum wage or state minimum wage in certain areas of the grant. It has been simplified and now we are using whichever is highest. So right now the state minimum wage is the highest. For calendar year 2022 grants, the code specifies that we have to use the December 2021 minimum wage to qualify those grants. And in December 2021, the state minimum wage was $9.50 per hour. And just to compare, federal was $7.25. So for job creation grants, if you have a net new permanent full-time position earning at least 175% of the minimum wage, which is about $16.63, and is offered health benefits, then that position could get $500 per year. If you have a position that's earning at least 200% of minimum wage, which is $19, that position can receive $800 per year. And this is different for HUAs, which are your high unemployment areas. We'll go over that in another slide. And businesses can receive grants for up to 350 positions per year. And they can receive that grant for 5 years to start out with for those positions, as long as they're keeping those positions. And then they can apply for subsequent grant years after that as well. So this is what calculating an award looks like. So let's say that your base year was 2020, because if you're starting in 2022, this is your first year you're applying, you can use 2020 or 2021 for your grant year. You have 10 permanent full-time positions and in the base year, and in the grant year, you have 20 total. All positions earn 175% of that minimum wage, and they all worked between January 1st and December 31st of 2022. All 10 are offered health benefits equal to at least 50% of the premium. So for to calculate, you take your 20 grant year positions and you subtract your 10 base year positions. That equals 10 employees. Then you take those 10 employees and you subtract that 4-job threshold, which equals 6 employees. So you have 6 grant eligible positions at $500 per position. That's $3,000 grant from the job creation grant program. I will go over high unemployment areas really quickly. I know I'm coming up on my own time here. Businesses located in high unemployment areas qualify for a lower wage rate. That's 150% of the minimum wage instead of 175% of the minimum wage. Those include Brunswick, Danville, Emporia, Franklin, Hopewell, Martinsville, Petersburg, and Portsmouth. I already went over this, the 5-year period and applying for subsequent grants after that. So what you can really qualify for is up to 15 years total. The application process. So to be eligible for grant year 2022, a property must have been placed in service between January 1st and December 31st of 2022. That includes any final placed in service document, certificate of occupancy, final inspection or third-party inspection. For a job creation grant, the business must have increased employment over their base year number by that 4-job threshold at least, anywhere between January 1st and December 31st of 2022. And so all of those real property investment grant applications require a CPA attestation, and most JCG applications require an attestation as well, unless employment is fewer or equal to 100 positions and 25 or fewer grant eligible positions were created. This is a list of those required documents for the application. They're all on our website and on our portal. We have specific forms. The applicant declaration is something that you sign saying that everything is correct on the form. The local zone administrator, who's your local economic development person, they sign it. You submit a Commonwealth of Virginia W-9, and then you also have a few other possible supplemental documents. And I know I talked really quickly and went over a lot of information. Please know that you can reach out to me anytime with any question, and I'm happy to have a one-on-one meeting to talk to you more about the programs, to talk to you more in depth, and even to go over the actual application process of how a business goes in and applies for the grant and works with the CPA as well. Region 3 is really great about using their enterprise zone program, and I know they will continue to be, because they have a lot of really great local economic developers and SBDC folks and business owners there. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm sorry to cut my time short, and I look forward to working with all of you in the future.